An economic crisis is, of course, a very unpleasant phenomenon that humanity inevitably has to face from time to time. Because of the crisis, the standard of living of the population and the level of security decrease, unemployment increases, which causes social tension, and in some particularly severe cases, anarchy sets in, which significantly increases crime and makes life not only difficult, but also dangerous. People are quite wild and aggressive creatures, so if their fragile civilized world starts to collapse, it is replaced by wolf laws, by which not every person knows how to live. And therefore, a modern, soft-bodied society, with brains diluted by the mundane and stultifying culture and education, automatically becomes a hostage to any instability and anarchy, in which being weak becomes not only unprofitable, but also dangerous. This is when everything is good, when everyone is well-fed and happy, you can afford to be a frivolous and flighty person, trusting other people and not worrying about anything. But in harsh times, when there is a crisis outside, being inadequate is fraught with consequences. You will be quickly devoured if you look like food. Many people begin to understand who they really are and where they really are in the society they live in, precisely during an economic crisis. It is not surprising that in such an unfavorable time, when people have serious problems with money, work, and most importantly, with safety, many find themselves sitting with their bare bottoms next to the latrine where the ruling elite has thoughtfully placed them. But when you are being fed more or less well next to this latrine, you somehow do not feel the stench, the inconvenience, the obvious discomfort that surrounds you, although they have always surrounded and surround many of us, regardless of whether there is a crisis or not. Therefore, a crisis is, to some extent, a beauty. It puts everything in its place, it shows us ourselves. It separates the boys from the men, the real businessmen from the brainless profiteers, the strong from the weak, the really cool people from the paper peppers. It is no longer possible to appear to be someone you are not in reality, you have to be who you are. Children stop playing their games in all these numerous offices that have grown in large cities like mushrooms after rain, and in which social parasites who do anything but socially useful work love to settle. Keep in mind that I am not talking about all office workers, because some of them bring a lot of benefit to society. In a crisis, there are fewer, first of all, those bureaucrats who really ruin the economy with their appetites and their sabotage aimed at justifying their existence. You understand, when for one with a plow, there are 7 with a spoon, what the hell kind of economy can there be here? When those who divide become more numerous than those who produce, expect a crisis that will come and restore order in society and force the drones to start working. And so, life somehow, during a crisis, becomes more honest, or something, more severe, but also more honest. You can find a lot of explanations on the internet about why economic crises happen and what they are. In particular, it is believed that economic crises are an innovation of recent years, that they are supposedly characteristic of capitalism, and so on. In fact, this is all nonsense. Crises have always existed and are everywhere. They just take different forms, depending on the environment in which they appear and the conditions in which they develop. A crisis, friends, no matter what kind, financial, economic, political, social, humanitarian, midlife crisis and all sorts of other crises, will always originate where there are people. The only question is what color and taste this or that crisis will be. I am not going to retell you all these definitions of a crisis and the patterns of its occurrence, just as I am not going to retell other people's words about what and how to do during an economic crisis in order to survive. I am not an economist and I don't care about all these economic theories and dogmas. I have my own experience, my own brains, and my own eyes that see what is happening around them. But I prefer to trust my ears less often, because people are too good at riding on each other's ears, especially well-fed, educated, and very cunning people who care about the public good have succeeded in this. I have my own views on any crisis, including the economic crisis. I have my own thoughts on this matter, and it is these thoughts, as well as the knowledge that I received from from my point of view, people that I will share with you in this article. Talking to economist friends who are not interested in telling me all sorts of fairy tales, and also reading some books, and most importantly, thinking carefully with my own head, I have made some conclusions regarding the economic crisis, which I will kindly share with you, dear readers. I want you to understand what the meaning of the economic and not only economic crisis is. Why do you need to know what I think? Well, firstly, with the help of my thoughts, you will be able to form your own thoughts, which will tell you how to survive during the crisis, and even, perhaps, benefit from it. Secondly, understanding the nature of the economic crisis, you will also understand the nature of man, which, in fact, lies at the root of all our troubles. Well, thirdly, what I generally teach individually, but what I will partially share with everyone in this article, talking about the economic crisis, is a good understanding of what this crisis, is in reality, if we discard all sorts of theoretical nonsense, which will help you use this phenomenon, unpleasant for most people, for your own benefit. Regarding the third point, I warn you right away, my recommendations will be general and limited, because I provide detailed information on how to profit from the crisis only on a paid basis, which, due to the stupidity and greed of some people, means that not everyone will receive this information. You understand, such information cannot be free. And most importantly, not everyone should have it, otherwise it will lose its power. This is not about how to get rid of cockroaches, or how to properly grow cucumbers in the garden. Here we are talking about the opportunity to earn money at a time when everyone is losing it. Therefore, I will not write anything extra in this article. An economic crisis brings not only harm to society, but also benefit, because it brings people to their senses, makes them more down to earth, moderates their ambitions and punishes them for their greed. In general, it is not the crisis, but society itself that harms itself, if we are to be precise in our judgments, because it is society that spits on working economic laws and prefers to follow laws that do not work, but look more attractive. After all, what do people want? To work less, or better yet, not to work at all and earn more, and have more of everything, right? Is this possible on a planet with limited resources, for the correct distribution of which the economy was invented? In general, to a certain extent, yes, it is possible, but only to a certain extent. After all, if you look closely at people's lives, they will seem to you the most unreasonable life on the planet, since it is man who, judging by his ability, or rather, inability to manage the resources available to him, is the most wasteful, and therefore the most unreasonable creature. Look, even locusts don't eat more than they need, but humans eat. Humans gorge themselves, choke, vomit, and still eat. Humans will never get full, no matter how much you feed them. But excuse me, friends, if we devour everything at a frantic pace, then everything we eat will very quickly run out, and then what will be left for us? After all, not only is even one human being incredibly voracious, especially in those cases when nothing and no one limits its appetite, which, as we know, comes with eating, but this individual can also lay its larvae, and sometimes in such large quantities that there are then a lot of voracious individuals. As a result, by the way, hunger occurs. You see, if we return to the question of human rationality, how unreasonable are people? Why the hell do they reproduce in such large numbers, and thereby harm themselves? Is this some kind of special form of genius of human thought, when on a planet with limited resources, people reproduce in unlimited quantities? Well, let's now turn our attention to how nature copes with the excess of a species on the planet, which has proliferated due to two favorable conditions. It destroys the species with the help of other species that devour it. Nature optimizes the number of different living beings through their mutual destruction. Some species devour other species, and harmony arises in nature. The number of each population should be within reasonable limits. And what happens to people? How do people optimize their numbers? Wars, diseases, hunger, natural disasters, in a word, everything that we are accustomed to consider evil, in fact, is a medicine for our planet, curing it of people. Nature does not want to get rid of people at all, it needs them, like other species, and I have no idea why it needs all this, but apparently, as long as our universe expands, we will also live and develop, moving towards some global goal. In general, if we express ourselves politically correctly, in a modern way, then the planet optimizes the number of people, nature optimizes the number of people, the supreme intelligence, God, the universe optimizes the number of people by reducing their numbers in various ways. You can believe in whatever you want and attribute this act to whomever you want, God, the supreme intelligence, nature, green or gray men, it is your business, but the fact that our numbers are influenced from outside and from within us, I think, is obvious to you, as it is to me. Oh, by the way, if you think that, unlike diseases and natural disasters, wars and famines are artificial in nature, that is, that such bad, at first glance, things happen because of man, then you are deeply mistaken. The very fact that man is aggressive by nature, that he is largely unreasonable, greedy, envious, vain, hateful of his own kind, and I would even say parasitic, this term belongs to me, I did not find it in the dictionaries, testifies to the fact that nature has laid in us, in people, such behavior scenarios, in which we can destroy each other in every possible way. This is necessary so that there are not too many of us, and we do not destroy the entire planet. So far, we have destroyed it only partially, but you already see how terrible it is. An economic crisis, my friends, is also a natural phenomenon, not an artificial one, not a man-made phenomenon, let's say. Despite the fact that it was people who invented the economy, not nature, and it is they who manage it in such a way that we periodically face economic, financial and other crises, it is nature that makes human behavior such that, despite all understanding of certain patterns, he behaves quite unreasonably and harms his own well-being with his actions. Man harms other people and himself, precisely because nature needs to moderate his appetites and limit the number of our entire species. And what forms our madness will take, forms of obvious barbarity or forms of various crises, nature does not care, for it these are absolutely meaningless formalities. It speaks to us in a language we understand, and if it does not reach us through our heads, then it will reach us through wars, famine, epidemics, through economic crises, and the like. We do not know how, because we do not want to rationally distribute the resources that our planet has kindly provided us. We devour and destroy everything, then seize new territories and again barbarically destroy all the resources available on these territories. We, like viruses, build something when we reproduce uncontrollably, only in order to destroy something, including ourselves. Our craving for destruction is reflected in everything, from minor household sabotage to world wars and the economic crises that we are discussing in this article. We love to destroy and exterminate everything, perhaps even more than to build and create, and what we do best is to harm ourselves. I speak, probably, almost like Agent Smith from the movie The Matrix, who compared people to viruses, but I am not telling you about science fiction, my friends, but about reality, albeit harsh. We will never get rid of economic and other crises, because the absence of such problems contradicts our own nature. We rob ourselves, we kill ourselves, we torture ourselves, because we are initially, at the genetic level, sick, and this disease of ours is the medicine for our planet. Our pathological greed and desire to stand out from the rest of the people, having previously humiliated the weakest of them, underlies all those problems in the economy that we encounter with increasing regularity. The neighbor has a better car than us, his apartment is larger and more spacious, or a house, his salary is some shameful 100 rubles higher, and in general, he looks too happy, which is unforgivable, and all these things are already a huge reason to hate him and subconsciously wish him harm. And it doesn't matter that we have bread on the table, that we are clothed and shod and have a roof over our heads, it doesn't matter that, in general, we feel quite comfortable, because if our neighbor has all of this, if he also feels comfortable, then understanding all of this creates discomfort for us, which turns into a problem, to solve which we need to become cooler, we need to become richer, we need to humiliate our neighbor, we need to make him envy us, we need his torment and suffering. Isn't that so? Somewhere deep inside us, all this poisonous shit sits. Do you think the economy is all these damn colorful graphs and figures drawn by immature schoolchildren? I have nothing against schoolchildren. School age is a wonderful time, in warm and cozy offices, or is it endless, abstruse theories of all sorts of dry-brained penguins who imagine themselves to be great scientists and economists? Nothing of the sort. The economy is our damn psychology, it is our natural essence, our gut, which real economists try to adjust to something more or less reasonable and rational, so that we can behave with the resources we have in a civilized manner. Give most people a lot of food, and they, as we know, will overeat, shit themselves, become lazy, start throwing this food around, choking, shoving it into their ears and God knows where else. Even primates do not behave the way some people behave when they have a lot of food. The more food a person has, the more nonsense he produces. Of course, it's the same with any other resources. And the economy, you see, tries to convince a person that having eaten his fill today, he needs to think about tomorrow, when he'll want to eat again, when he'll need resources again. Resources need to be managed rationally, that is, so that they're not all used up at once, but so that they last a long time. But try explaining this to those savages who, for the sake of stupid and cheap show-offs, are ready to take off their last shirt, just to have a good time, right here and now. So, to hell with all these graphs, to hell with the figures, to hell with theories, no matter who, Marx or Smith. We need to deal with people, it is they who need to be hammered into their heads with the understanding that if they want to live well, they must do things the way they should, and not the way they want. Therefore, it is precisely that society that will be more economically, and therefore politically and socially stable, in which people will control themselves most effectively. They want to, but they don't do it, because they can't do things the way they shouldn't. But you can't explain this to the cattle, they don't understand why they can't, if they want to. Therefore, if you want to create a good economy in which there won't be too frequent and too severe economic crises, you need to either intimidate the same cattle, or isolate them from more or less normal society, or initially, you need to educate and raise people in such a way that they don't grow up to be dumb cattle. This is the only way to create a more or less viable economy, which, due to our natural qualities, will not be without flaws, but which will allow us to survive and preserve our society in a more or less civilized form. Remember this, no economic model, no matter how perfect it is, will work in a society of bestial morons, for whom any rules and laws are something that must be ignored and violated. For cattle, any anarchy is cool, and any law and any rules are an irritating strain. A rotten economy is a reflection of a rotten society that does not like to voluntarily observe the rules necessary for creating a normal, human life. If, without any interpretation of the past, we look at people's lives and think about them, it turns out that humanity has always lived in crisis. One crisis was replaced by another crisis, one problem was replaced by another problem, and there was always hunger, and wars, and problems with money. There is no political system or economic model in which crises in one form or another would be impossible. Some problems will always be there, because, as has already been said above, they are based on human nature, and not on the socio-economic model of society in which he lives. The question is different. The question is how we will react to these problems, what actions we will take to solve them, and whether we will solve them at all. After all, if because of some greedy freaks, although we are all moderately greedy, we are faced with an economic crisis, which can easily develop into a financial crisis, when, say, insolent bankers with their lousy speculations create financial bubbles, making money, not even from money, but from thin air, we have to somehow survive in such conditions, we have to somehow get by. What difference does it make who is to blame for this or that problem if we have no way to hold these people accountable? And a crisis, any crisis in general, not only an economic one, is always someone's specific screw-up to a greater extent, and to a lesser extent our common screw-up. We have to survive in any case, because we came into this world to live, and not to fold our paws at the first difficulties. And we are talking not only about money, which we can lose overnight, and we will simply have nothing to live on, we are also talking, or rather, can be talking, about our physical survival. After all, a very serious economic crisis can lead, and usually does lead, to a socio-political crisis, and even to a social catastrophe. And this is no joke. The fact that you can be thrown out of work, your salary can be lowered, you can lose all your savings by devaluing the national currency, these are all small things, so to speak, the flowers. But when in some particular country or, God forbid, in the whole world, a war begins, due to economic upheavals, then you have to think not about money, but about your own skin. We have lived through both civil and world wars, we know what it is like, therefore, we have something to compare with, we have something to fear and something to prepare for. Man is an extremely aggressive and often completely unreasonable creature, he can do such things, acting on emotions, that our entire civilization can go down the drain. I am absolutely sure that we will have civil and world wars, and all sorts of crises will always exist, because man has not changed at all during his entire stay on Earth, so I categorically do not recommend that you hope only for the best. But you, my friends, need to prepare for the worst, and now we will talk about how you can prepare for an economic crisis and how you can survive this crisis in general. The most important thing that I try to hammer into the heads of some of my clients, let's call them that, who are trying to improve their financial situation with my help, and trying, it should be noted, not without success, is the need to think about tomorrow. Yes, you can't lay down straw everywhere, it is impossible to be ready for all problems, but some, at least the most minimal insurance, can still be provided for yourself, with your foresight. If everything is fine and stable for you today, if you earn good money, you have a job and some savings, well, start putting at least a little of your money aside for the so-called rainy day. I don't know how true the statistics I've heard are, but according to them, only 40% of Russians have some savings. In my opinion, 40% is not enough, and the rest, what, do they live for today or what? And what will they do during a crisis? A person must have ruble and dollar deposits, and also a certain amount of money must be kept under his mattress. I draw your attention, dear readers, to the fact that deposits in foreign currency must be in dollars, not in euros, not in yuan, not in yen or any other currency, but in dollars. The stability of the dollar as a world reserve currency, as well as the stability of the political system in the United States, is the foundation of our trust in the green paper with portraits of American presidents. As for savings, there is no need to save too much money. The state is well aware of the tendency of some of us, 40% of Russians, and possibly more, to save, and therefore always considers various options to take these savings from citizens, or devalue them. But you should definitely have some money for a rainy day. Some people tell me that in Russia every day is a rainy day. Guys, don't talk nonsense. If you want to live for today, then be prepared for the fact that you will feel very bad when the crisis comes. And if you still don't mind thinking about tomorrow, then prepare for an economic crisis in advance, because it will definitely happen. And if there is no economic crisis, there will be some other crisis, for which you also need to be prepared. We cannot live without crises. We are so arranged that we do not allow ourselves to live in peace. In Russia, as in any other country in the world, there are normal periods of time when everything grows and develops, and when money almost falls from the sky, and there are times when everything is very, very bad. If the crisis has already arrived and you, due to your unpreparedness for it, have found yourself in a difficult situation, then the most important thing that is required of you is not to panic. This is also difficult for me to hammer into the heads of people who turn to me for help. Damn sheep panic leads to an incredible number of mistakes that people, without controlling themselves, begin to make in difficult and, most importantly, non-standard situations for themselves. Then everyone breaks into stores for all sorts of nonsense in order to spend their money profitably, while for the crisis it is better to save it, even if it depreciates. Then everyone runs to exchange offices to exchange, for example, the same rubles for dollars, when this dollar is greatly appreciated. People lose more money on conversion in such situations, and also by currency at the peak of its value, and then, surprisingly, when its value falls, they try to sell it just as chaotically. Even the worst economist understands that you need to buy when it is cheap and sell when it is expensive. And don't tell me that it doesn't work. If you think with your head and don't panic, then everything works. And buying currency when its price is growing is like trying to jump on the last car of a departing train. In principle it is possible, but somehow stupid. You need to come to the platform earlier. So don't panic, learn to control yourself, train your psyche. There are plenty of ways to do this, otherwise it is not so much the crisis itself that will harm you, but you yourself. I remember I saved a lot of money for a person by putting him on the right path, as they say, when the dollar was falling in relation to the ruble, among other things, in 2008. Then, I remember, people rushed to get rid of dollars. Everyone was running around like crazy and talking about how much money they had lost because of the fall in the exchange rate. There was terrible panic. In any case, in the environment in which I happened to work at that time, there was a lot of panic. And I didn't consult my clients, who were partly my friends at that time. As such, I recommended not only not to sell green paper, but on the contrary, to buy it up. And now what? Now do you see how much the ruble costs and how much the dollar costs? The financial and economic crisis is friends, including the stupid sheep panic that most people cannot cope with, being not intellectually developed enough. And instead of calmly making the right, balanced decisions, even in a situation where you are not prepared for the crisis, naively believing that everything will always only grow and prosper, you will rush from side to side, you will panic, you will make spontaneous decisions, you will make mistakes and thereby only worsen your situation. The dollar is falling, I am losing money, people were shouting. And I asked them, where will this dollar go? Well, where? What will replace it? Perhaps the ruble. What are you going crazy? I say a real crisis is happening in your head, and not in real life. Buy up dollars, I say, idiots, and not only dollars, but also some other things and assets, and you will emerge from the crisis as winners, as I did. But, as is usually the case, the crowd is always dumber than the dumbest Siberian felt boot. It does not want to understand anything. It reacts primitively to various irritants. Well, those people who listen to me still feel very comfortable with their dollars, not to mention that they are always, thanks to our work with them, one step ahead of any events. If you can't pull yourself together, if you don't know how you should act during an economic crisis, then seek help from financial experts. They will help you start saving money correctly, and help you not to lose your job, or find one if necessary, and cope with stress, and even, for example, if you seek help from me, you will be able to learn how to use the crisis to your advantage. This is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of this article. For some, war is for others, even their own mother. There are so-called crisis experts who know how to not only make money from crises, but also make a killing, knowing what and how to do in such situations. Friends, having felt the hard way in 1998 what a crisis is, and I was still very young then and could not fully provide for myself, I decided for myself that I would no longer allow life to wipe its feet on me. I spent a lot of money, time and effort on learning from the crisis specialists I mentioned, how to properly prepare for an economic crisis, and how to act when this crisis hits. And now, of course, I won't say that I can completely forget about all these crises, they certainly stress me out to a certain extent. But in general, I know how to survive in such a difficult time for most people, and most importantly, I know how to profit from a crisis, as much as possible in a given situation. So, if you want, I can teach you this too. The main thing is to understand that every game has its own rules. And if you know these rules and even know how to get around them, you can win something for yourself by playing this or that game. Now, any crises are games that not many people know how to play, so not many people win in these games. To survive a crisis, you need to stop living an old life and start living a new life, adapting to the new reality. The less you think about tomorrow today, the more difficult it is to do this, that is, the less pragmatic you are, the more difficult it will be for you to cope with various difficulties, due to your basic lack of preparation for them. After all, if you do not think about your own development, or how you will live if, for example, you are fired from work, if your salary is lowered, and so on, then you will simply be unprepared for various, including negative, changes and will get lost in the new reality. But if this has already happened, and you do not know what to do now, how to survive, how to get out of a difficult situation, contact specialists, me or someone else you trust, they will help you sort out your problems. The main thing is not to panic, do not let emotions deprive you of reason. Economic crises hit hardest those people who do not want and do not know how to think. As for how to profit from the crisis, I will give you one simple, but very powerful and meaningful thought. In a crisis, friends, some things become more expensive, and some become cheaper, and sometimes very sharply. Therefore, if you buy and sell correctly, you will make a very good profit, or in any case, you, with your competent actions, will compensate for your losses from the crisis, from which we, ordinary citizens, alas, are not insured. Our mind and our knowledge are our only insurance for all occasions. Moreover, given the general panic and depression, in a crisis it is very, very profitable to engage in certain types of activities that people would not pay much attention to in normal times, but during a crisis, these types of activities become very profitable, since they attract people like a magnet. In general, if you are interested in specifics, contact me for advice. I will not give everyone a recipe for free on how to use the economic crisis to your advantage. And it's not even so much about my greed, because even though I spent a lot of money to learn from smart people how to make money on crises, it still doesn't bother me at all. I don't feel greedy. The thing is that if everyone knows what and how to do during a crisis, then it will be difficult to make money on it. Moreover, with the stupid copying of others' actions, the crowd in its desire to profit from the crisis will lead us all to a new, even more severe crisis, which will destroy us all to hell. So, as you understand, this information is not for everyone, so I will not give it out so simply, for free. Those who need it will get it from me, and those who do not need it, who know and can do everything themselves, or who are sorry to pay money for such information, let them get by themselves as they want. Greed and stupidity lead people to economic and other crises, and these same qualities can prevent people from getting out of these crises. In general, we must understand that those people who arrange crises for us, they benefit from them. After all, a crisis is, to a certain extent, a controlled process, and I hope that you understand this. I hope that you are not so naive as to believe that everything happens by itself. That is, in the sense that our human nature controls us, this is clear, and an economic crisis is, after all, to a greater extent a natural phenomenon, but those people who, let's say, shape this crisis in a certain way, they always only benefit from it. By this I want to say that a crisis, in the form in which some people arrange it for themselves and others, is necessary not only to curb the appetites of the majority of people and bring them down to earth, but also for the profit of a minority, on the problems of the majority. In other words, an economic crisis is a great opportunity to profit at the expense of a huge number of people. It is, in fact, a minority robbing the majority. I will not tell you who this minority is. I have touched on this issue in my other articles, which I recommend you read as much as you can. It is important for us to understand, first of all, that by trying to benefit from an economic crisis, we will act in our own selfish interests, to the detriment of the interests of the majority. This is life, friends, so we have no other choice. In such situations, when it is a matter of life and death, and when this or that process is not under our control, and in principle cannot be controlled,